Also, peacebuilding efforts that address the underlying climate and environmental drivers of conflict are going to be more successful and sustainable in the long term. There have been very important discussions on these topics taking place at different levels in different fora, not least at the last COP28, which took place last December in Dubai. And it was the first COP ever that was dedicated, that had a dedicated day to peace. And from that day, a resolution on climate relief, recovery and peace came out. It was signed by, I think we are at 82 countries that signed it, and 43 organizations that committed by signing this declaration to concrete actions to harnessing this climate peace potential. So the process is now on for implementing the declaration led by the COP28 presidency. I think we have some members of the presidency here today, together with a very broad coalition of partners from different communities, the climate community, peace-building community, development, humanitarian community, all here in the room today as well. So in this roundtable today, we want to kind of contribute to kicking off this process by encouraging reflection on what are existing experiences designing and delivering peace positive climate action, but also climate security. Here is the COP28. Nice to you guys. Climate security risk informed peace building as well, experiences in fragile and conflict affected countries. What are successful examples? What has gone well? What has gone wrong? And we should learn from and improve. And how can these learnings inform future investments, especially for international climate finance institutions? And what partnerships opportunities exist with this agenda? So these are the three questions that we got our discussion today. We want to make a very interactive event, and we hope to give as much space as possible for all of you here and online to participate in the discussion. To kick us off, I will invite three speakers, three colleagues, to share their experiences and thoughts on these questions. We have Jan Schamberg here with us, who leads the Peacebuilding Fund's investments in the Sahel, Haiti, and Northern Africa, and also leads the Peacebuilding Fund portfolio on climate peace and security. On the line with us, we have Paul Junot, hopefully. Paul is in Haiti at the moment, and unfortunately, hello, Paul. Unfortunately, the
hello, everyone.
Another wave of violence. So we hope for that the connection would be well. We hope that everybody's going to be safe and the connection will be stable, and we can hear from Paul a bit later in the session. Paul is an environmental law specialist and mediator with the UN Environmental Program in Haiti. And we also have with us Mohamed Fadiga. Hopefully, yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah, here it is. Hi, Fadiga.
Hi, everyone.
Fadiga is a sub-regional resilience specialist in the Emergency and Resilience Team as part of FAO's sub-regional office for West Africa. So we'll have these three speakers starting us off, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. We'll dedicate the first 15-20 minutes of the discussion to the conversation in the room. So participants here in person, please just feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to get as many interventions in as possible. And then we'll leave the second part, so 15-20 minutes for our participants online. I believe my colleagues, Nina and Alex from Adelphi, who are attending from the online side of the room, will guide the participants online with the instructions on how to pose your questions and make your comments. Okay, I think just one more thing before we start. You may have seen that the session is being recorded. This is only for documentation purposes, because the plan is after this session to produce a practical note with some of the kind of key takeaways of our discussion. If you object to the session being recorded, please do get in touch with me, or if you're online with my colleagues, Alex, and we'll deal with this later. Okay, so without further ado, let me turn to Jan first. Yeah, very briefly, can you share some key takeaways from the experience of the Peacebuilding Fund, initiating and funding climate peace and security projects in many contexts really around the world? What have you learned? What has been particularly successful, and what has not worked out so well?
Now, thank you, Bea, and great to be here with so many friends and colleagues in the room. For us, as part of the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, this is really exciting that we signed up the declaration. We committed to really support the operationalization, because we really see the way climate has major implications on our ability to prevent conflict and sustain peace around the world. I'm glad to share with you a couple of the findings from our work. I think that what's interesting is that for the past couple of years, we've been investing around 15% of the Peacebuilding Fund in projects on climate peace and security. And this has been a steady trend, but without us having a target or any kind of dedicated window per se around that area of work. So this is something that is, and I always like to start with that, because this really shows that this is demand driven, coming from the field, but it also is prioritized by governments, because everything we do at the Peacebuilding Fund comes and is prioritized, signed off by the countries, and then prioritized in terms of, they know that we have a limited funding window. So if it gets prioritized, that means that it's making and becoming one of the top 3 things that governments want to do in conflict and fragile affected states. So this looks at, today a portfolio of over $130 million. So this kind of can look small compared to what the more bigger funds and vertical funds are doing, or what the IFIs are doing. But I think it's interesting to look at the size and the temporality of our investment, to also think about how we can work better together and look at scaling up options. I think what's interesting also to flag is that our portfolio comprises projects both at the national and the cross-border region. And our thematic review really highlighted that those cross-border investments are really important also as part of the climate peace and security portfolio, even though we all know that they are more complicated and difficult to implement, but still really, really important to do so. Again, if I look at our portfolio, we have Yemen, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Sahel, Haiti. So really, all the countries that you see on the top news are part of our climate peace and security portfolio. So just really to stress that we can do it, we've been doing it, and we are really looking at ways of how we can bring other partners to scale up our investments. But I think that in this whole conversation, what really is important, it's beyond the numbers and the call to invest more funding. It's really to think about how we do it and the peace positive impact that such projects needs to have in conflict and fragile affected states. So in terms of this peace positive impact, I think that some of the programming parameters that we are using, and that I think that we need to collectively look at, it's on one hand, how do we do and how do we frame our support in conflict and fragile affected states on a strong conflict analysis? How do we integrate and really mainstream those climate risks as part of the analysis? On our side, we have a faster design and approval process than a lot of the vertical funds. So if we get a demand, we could be developing and approving a project in a month, 2 months potentially. So we can be really quick in the design and the approval process. And I think that this flexibility allows us to really ground our programming on the reality and the picture of the country and the region where we want to work at a certain day. But what we also need in such settings is to have the flexibility and the adaptability, because if you take a picture today of the Liptako-Goma region, in 3 months, where you can go, the access, the level of violence, you have such fluidity in both the political context and the security context that you also need to have the adaptability and the flexibility to change the programming. How do you work with the communities? How you need to potentially change the way you engage in your work. So I think that this flexibility and adaptability is really important, so you can really respond to the fluid and security context. But at the same time, you need to have the risk tolerance if you want to work in these environments. So for us, as a fund, we have that is part of our DNA, the risk-tolerant approach, but we do it with the right mitigation strategy at the same time, and really thinking that you do not want to the do no harm approach to conflict sensitivity, and how do we have very strong mitigation strategies as embedded as part of our programming, and really from the beginning at the design phase. Linked to that risk tolerance approach, it's how do we work on a tranche-based support. We fund the first tranche. For high-risk projects, we do 3 tranches, so the funding comes in different ways. Another parameter, it's how we look at our theory of change of this project, pushing for co-benefits on both the climate piece and security, and having an impact on both sides. But at the same time, having also the monitoring and the evaluation approach to really map out the kind of change we want to bring about with these projects. And I think that as part of this conversation, the whole monitoring and evaluation is really something that we need to do more of in terms of identifying what the success looks like in these kind of programming and these environments, and what the success looks like with the double hats on the peace side and on the climate side. And really thinking about what are the most relevant indicators. So that's on the M&E side. Another quality criteria for us has really been around inclusion. So how do we work with women and youth, and how we do this from a very strong mainstreaming approach from the design, implementation, but also the budgeting. We look in a lot of details in this, and that's really for us kind of the quality assurance as well. And then the last part, maybe it's, and that also came as part of our thematic review, it's how this is kind of a nascent area of work, and how capacity building and training is needed on the programming side, but also working with our key counterparts in country in terms of knowing what kind of change we want to bring about, what is the peace building vision, and how do we work collectively on that. I want to maybe spend 2 minutes on partnership opportunities and suggestions, and really looking at the way our peace building work is really grounded on national ownership. And for us, what we are doing, we need this to be sustained by other partners, but also embedded, and anchored with local and national institutions. And at the same time, we as a fund have this approach that we want our investments to be catalytic. And I think that what we are really looking at in terms of next steps, it's really looking at our investments and how what we've been doing in all these countries can be used by other partners, climate investment funds, vertical funds, and bilateral and multilateral partners in terms of de-risking their investments there. When you think about our time frame, our projects are going to be 2 to 3 years maximum. So that gives us a little bit of a time to test a method, test an approach, work in a certain region, and then kind of sequence our work with the work of other partners. And I think that this is really what we want to do in the next couple of months, bringing different partners as part of the design phase to really think about the sequencing. We're going to be present in Haiti now for the next 2 years, in Jérémie, in Port-au-Prince, looking at displacement and youth employment. Well, what the picture is going to look like after 2 years, who can take and sustain this work, but with different kind of investments. Looking also at how we can maybe discuss potential framework scaling up agreements with some of the vertical funds, climate investment funds. Maybe this is something where there'll be appetite. We are willing to explore this. Looking also at, on one hand, this pipeline of projects, but at the same time, thinking about how the work that we do, and a lot of our implementing partners are going to be UN organizations, but we also work with civil society organizations. And, I'm looking at the colleague of Cordate when we're discussing localization. I have great partners doing this kind of work in Mali, Burkina Faso, great national NGOs who used to be implementing partners for UN agencies, funds, and programs. Now they get funding directly from us. In 3 years, 4 years, maybe they'll be accredited also to the adaptation fund or other vertical funds. So I think it's this kind of also sequencing on the partnership side that I think would be very interesting. I think what would be great is also to look at more blended finance approach. We have this in the DRC and Burundi. And again, looking at how from the get-go we get philanthropies, CAFI, PBF, the government to look at a super fascinating, interesting cross-border projects. So I think this kind of blended financing approach are very promising in this area of work. And then we want to continue working with all of you in terms of the evidence-based approach to really identify what works and what success look like. I think that this work around indicators seems very tedious, but this is really what's going to all help us to define what success look like, because the success is not going to be about just the money. It's about the impact that we have, and to measure that kind of impact, we need to have the evidence-based approach, the strong monitoring and evaluation framework, and the sharing of also, and the honesty to say what has worked and what has not worked. 2 points maybe to finish off. The first one, it's really for member states and different partners to keep in mind that the new agenda for peace has specific recommendations also around this agenda. This is something that will be considered by member states as part of the Summit of the Future in September. So it's interesting to look at that process. And then to really say that as PBF, we are really keen to continue to invest in this area of work and are really looking to explore synergies and partnership with other partners. We had really exciting conversations this week while in DC. Hope to continue to be having this kind of strategic thinking about what we do better off in the new phases of investment. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Diana. Really interesting to get an insight in terms of some very concrete aspects of the project, what has worked, your focus on inclusion, on the different funding modalities, and the risk-tolerant approach that you've taken. Really interesting, I think, call for action, put forward and advice on partnerships that we heard from you. And I think I really like your message about we can do it, we are doing it. So let's see more of this. And I think that's the perfect sequel to give the floor to Paul from IT. I hope Paul is still on the line with us.
Hi, Bea. Yes,
Hi,
I'm on the line. Hello,
Great.
everyone. Good morning. Nice to be here with you today. I'm very happy, and I'm very happy to see you all. I'll switch my video a nanosecond. And then I'll turn it off because unfortunately the network is not very reliable. So hello. Okay. So I'll be speaking, but I'll keep my video off to have better network.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. Great to see you and great for you to be with us. Paul, you've been coordinating a really interesting community that has emerged precisely to address these questions of how do we do climate and peace work in the context of Haiti, what has now become the Climate Security Working Group. Can you tell us a bit more about this experience? What are key learnings and what does it mean going forward now that there will be these projects funded by the PBF in the country? What are key elements that you'll keep in mind as you're going forward in the implementation of these projects?
Yes, sure. So please make a sign if you can't hear me.
No, go ahead. We can hear you super well.
Okay, perfect. So in 2022, it became evident to many observers that climate and environmental challenges were among the drivers of the current situation of insecurity in Haiti. So a coalition, as Beatrice said, named the Climate Security Group, supported by the Climate Security Mechanism in New York, commanded an introductory study on climate security in Haiti to map out the linkages between climate, peace, and security, and propose initial steps on how to resolve them. The Climate Security Group is in Haiti is a successful initiative because it regroups between 60 to 90 organizations from Haitian government institutions, UN agencies, international organizations, France, with many international NGOs and more than 60 civil society organizations through the civil society platform for climate change. The group in itself is a real peace-building success because not all of these organizations have the same perspective or agree on the same political or economic agenda for Haiti. For example, some NGOs or civil society organizations are pretty critical about the historical positioning of the UN or some international actors with regards to Haiti. The support of the actual government is one of the key issues. Not all of the organizations are against the positioning of the UN, but some of them are. So there is a lack of trust right now between some of the civil society organizations towards the government and towards the Haitian institutions and the UN and other international actors. So it wasn't always easy at first to manage all these sometimes opposite views, but despite all these differences, the good thing is all of these organizations have a common agenda, which is the environment, climate, and peace agenda. And this is the common ground that we started to build on. The report of the study, which was realized by Adelphi, was published in 2023 and was endorsed by all the members of the Climate Security Group, which is a success in itself. It concludes that addressing the complex and multidimensional challenges that Haiti is facing, climate, environment, security, political, economic, and humanitarian, requires an explicit focus on climate and peace building with inclusion at its heart. One of the 4 priority areas of action to increase and target funding to address climate security challenges is that multilateral and bilateral donors should request proposals and projects that intentionally deliver climate and security benefits and ensure that they are informed by conflict and climate-sensitive analysis, are local led and bring together a diverse range of stakeholders. Also, coordinate between and with donors to avoid duplication of efforts and the dispersion of funds. And finally, put in place contingency mechanisms to ensure flexibility and adaptability to respond to deteriorating security conditions and governance challenges. The study recommends developing community-based responses to environmental management and sustainability that have nature-based solutions at their core as an entry point to address broader dynamics of insecurity and violence. The next step for the Climate Security Group is the implementation of the recommendations of the study. An example is that UNEP and ILO, International Labour Organization, are now implementing a PBF project, a Peacebuilding Fund project. And Diane said a few words about that. The project is in Grandance and is titled Youth, Agroecology, and Green Jobs for Peace. It aims to maintain peace and security and reduce conflict, insecurity, and migration among young people by capitalizing on the environment, mostly agroecology, as a vector of dialogue. We are doing this with civil society organizations that are very active in the area where we will have our interventions. The project addresses one of the main research axes of the climate security study, namely the increase in the vulnerability of young people, and implements at least 2 of the study's recommendations on nature-based solutions and community empowerment. There is also a project funded by the European Union that is now implemented that migrations with the participation of FAO and UNEP on the green, concerning the green reintegration of migrants. And also a big green climate fund project, global climate fund or green climate fund project implemented by UNDP that will also implement some of the recommendations of the study. I would add that flexibility and adaptability are very important for delivering results here because situations evolve rapidly in fragile and conflict-affected countries, and also in countries like Haiti that are most affected by climate-related events. A project that has been designed 5 years ago often reviewed by experts who are not even in the country, is probably not adapted to the new reality. And Diane said something about that, but that's one of the main strengths, I think, of the Peacebuilding Fund. So circumstances even change during the implementation of the project. So the results framework need to have the flexibility to adapt to these new circumstances. I could also insist on sustainability, but I find that I'm running out of time here. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing with us the experience of the Haiti climate security group and the really exciting projects that are now started. I think the case of Haiti, it's very dear to my heart because we worked together for more than 1 year on this. So I'm really invested personally as well, but I think it's a really interesting case of using climate and the challenge that climate change poses in a country as kind of the starting point for a common agenda that develops based on some conflict and climate sensitive analysis that translates into identifying entry points for programming, for opportunities for action, and then goes all the way up to implementation, keeping in mind the importance of sustainability, flexibility, all these parameters that you and Jan before you also highlighted. Great. Let me now turn to Fadiga. Thanks for your patience, Fadiga. Great to have you with us. Based on your and FAO experience in West Africa, how can local solutions that in many cases, and we've seen this in Haiti as well, for example, do exist within fragile and conflict-affected contexts to address some of the challenges? How can we harness these experiences, scale them up to address climate risks while at the same time contributing to conflict resolution and peace building outcomes and objectives?
Thank you, Beatrice. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. I have some background noise. I hope it won't affect the level of communication.
No, we can hear you very well.
Perfect, perfect. So really, thank you for the invitation. This is a pleasure from our end to contribute to this event. Thanking the World Bank for inviting it, for organizing it, but also thanking Adelphi and PBSO for the work done around this event. So as a UN agency that works on eradicating hunger, protecting rural livelihoods and lives while promoting long-term development, FAO really sits in a position where we have a lot of support that we could bring to local solutions that harness the potential of agri-food system to break the vicious cycle between climate change and conflict while enhancing and protecting sustainable peace. It is clear for us that climate and conflict really are two of the main drivers for food insecurity, both globally and in the region, more particularly in West Africa and the Sahel, where according to the Cadre Harmonisé, you have around 47 million people that will be food insecure if necessary actions are not taken. Conflict, of course, leads to food insecurity and malnutrition by reducing agricultural productivity, displacing farmers, destroying assets, and disturbing markets and services. In this regard, and recognizing the failing agri-food systems, that the failing agri-food system can affect multiple dimensions in human security. And I think this is a shared vision that we have with PBSO, hence the increasing portfolio of interventions that we have together in the sub-region. FAO has really identified 4 key climate-related security risks in relation to agri-food system, which are competition over natural resources, deterioration of livelihood conditions, climate-induced food price hikes, and at last but not the least, mobility and displacement, which is really an important element in West Africa and more particularly in the Sahel. So what have we learned as an agency, as a field agency, an agency for the people? What have we learned in our process? We did undertake a stock-taking exercise where we're capitalizing on good practices around the peace building initiatives and peace security initiatives that we've implemented in the sub-region. And we've learned, the most important thing that we've learned is that rather than focusing, for example, on mitigating the socio-economic consequences of conflicts, such as mobility and displacement, which are caused by the dual pressure of climate hazards and the security crisis, it is important and paramount for us to focus on dealing with the deep social, political causes by acting on conflict factors. And this, for example, could be done around strengthening the inclusion of actors in access to natural resources and economic opportunities. Talking about examples, I will share a few examples from different countries, giving you a field vision, but it's also important to keep in mind that the operationalizations of these pathways is informed by really an integrated context analysis and the application of conflict-sensitive approaches while leveraging the power of partnership, which is a very important element for us. So I was mentioning a few examples. I would like to share experience from the Liptako Gurma that was mentioned by Diane, and more precisely maybe from Mali and also from Somalia on some initiatives where we have tried to really directly address the root causes rather than addressing the consequences. For example, in the Liptako Gurma region between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, where we've had an important increase around the occurrence of conflicts and insecurity, well known by most of you and all over the news also. We have had some initiatives on climate vulnerability and community tensions, which exist between, of course, transhumants, pastoralists, and farmers. And the innovation here lied in the fact that there is a context of forced displacement due to insecurity and violence in the context. FAO and IOM have worked together on some tool that really helped on alerts, on system alert and mechanisms to manage conflicts at local level. For example, for us, it is clear that weak governance is a source of transboundary conflicts. This is why we work to set in motion really local conflict resolution mechanisms. For example, in 2022, over 200 agropastoral and inter-community conflicts were identified through the alert system, and over 60% were resolved through the conflict resolution mechanisms put in place. I myself in the field have had the experience on an interesting experience between farmers and herders, and how through the funds that we received through PBSO, we could really negotiate between them and see how the resources from one can be used by the other, and we can have sort of a social construct and social contract between these two actors that leads to the resolution of conflicts. For the sake of time, I'll move forward to Somalia, which is within the Horn of Africa, where we have two interesting initiatives also. The first one being the Youth in Action, in which, for example, the innovation has been around engaging youth in digital cadastral mapping to identify potential disputes over land, promoting an inclusive dialogue on district planning, allowing youth to articulate their vision as part of an intergenerational dialogue. I will not stress enough the necessity of turning the beneficiaries into active actors of initiatives, turning the beneficiaries into counterparts and making them take the lead for the transformational change we are working towards in terms of climate security. The second initiative in Somalia, which is also very interesting, using technology as the first one, is promoting inclusive action in peace building, in other terms, PIAT. The project is facilitating youth-led prioritization of canal rehabilitations via gamifications. In other terms, we call it play for peace or gaming for peace, where using a mobile application, you have different groups, women's group, irrigation committees, and farmer cooperatives, that using the app in a gaming matter, construct around a healthy competition between these two groups, the definition of certain actions that will lead to climate security. So these are some of the key examples from the Liptako Gurma, from Somalia that I would like to share with you. And on a final note, really, such as key messages, it is important for us to also share that our vision regarding climate change is that climate change and security risks have no boundary. And when we say they have no boundary, it means that climate change can occur in one area and have, of course, consequences in other ones. And this is clear, for example, when it comes to population movement, climate change, the population movement climate change can induce, and the changes, for example, when it comes to grassing and water availability, which calls upon us to really work toward the flexibility and the adaptability that were mentioned by Diana in the interventions we have at field level. And the second key message would be really how to strengthen and mainstream climate, peace, and security analysis. It is important to build strong analytic framework in order to support countries and their communities in sustaining peace. Without data, without informed-based interventions, we will not have really the required tailored impact in the field. This is also echoing what, of course, Diane and the colleagues mentioned before me. Of course, for us, improving the strategic coordination at all levels and building existing partnerships with regional institutions, agencies, programs, funds, in order to strengthen the Nexus HDP is important for us. This is an action that we'll take within our institution, but also with other institutions, avoiding this sort of linear intervention where we say, no, in this moment, according to this situation, only peace actors can be intervening, or only humanitarian actors can be intervening right now, or only development actors can be intervening right now. It is important to really to break these walls and connect all partners together in order not only to scale up the activities, the actions we have, but also to strengthen advocacy towards the mentioned flexibility for climate security among partners. So being a little over the time, please bear with me. As Francophones, we speak a lot. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. And no worries, I also have in Italian tend to speak a lot, so we are in good company. Really fascinating insights from your work. Really like the point about the need to address the root causes rather than consequences, and also your point about inclusion and integration and making beneficiaries the active players of our interventions rather than the beneficiaries and the stakeholders intended as passive recipients. I think that's something that we should really do more to keep in mind as we move forward in the implementation of this agenda. Great, so we're a bit over time, but I'll stop talking and open up the floor, first in person, and then I think my colleagues online will send me a couple of points and questions that have been posted in chat via WhatsApp. So if I'm looking at my phone, it's not that I'm chatting with somebody, I'm getting the questions from the online audience. Let's start with the people in the room, maybe. Anybody has some thoughts or comments? Yeah, please there, and then Peter. I can't see your names.
Yes, Sami. My name is Sami from Catholic Relief Services, CRS. Social cohesion and peace building department. And my question is to our good colleague in the fund. And for us, I mean, I really wanted to understand from your viewpoint the challenges you've been facing in implementing this fund in countries like South Sudan, for instance, so that we can learn from practical examples in those countries how the fund is. I know, like in South Sudan, the fund is a big contributor, a big player there. So really, what lessons can we learn, especially from the challenges and constraints side? Thank you.
Thanks. Dan, do you want to maybe quickly respond to that?
Sure. I think that in terms of challenges, we can see them at different moments. At the time of the design, in terms of getting the right hats around the table and really mapping out what's the theory of change and what do we want to achieve. I think that, because it's a bit of a nascent area of work, colleagues tend to come with, some of their tools and trying to apply them, but how do we retool some of the old tools? And I think that this is sometimes a little bit of the challenge. The projects are going to look sometimes a little bit too peace building-ish or a little bit too adaptation-ish. And it's how do we get them to be more joined up? I think this is one of the challenges we've had in terms of the design phase. Now, in terms of the implementation, it's more about today we can access this area, tomorrow we cannot. So how do we adapt then the programming activities? And I think that on our side, one of the solutions is this adaptability. Our projects, it's not if it's small changes, we don't need to review the small changes. So I think that for us, it's been able to be encouraging adaptive peace building. I think that this is really at the core also of peace building. And I think that that's why our approach, I feel, is so relevant when we look at this agenda. It's the agility to work in fragile settings, because without that level of agility, well, if you're, as a donor, want to stick that activities need to be implemented in targeted zone A, makes no sense if you cannot have access, if you're going to cause more harm than do good. So I think it's this kind of level of adaptability in terms of the challenges. Then I think there's the question of government ownership at the local level and at central levels. That tends to be also an issue. And how do we connect the dots? I think that a lot of the work that has been happening is at the local level. And I think that what is missing is how do we, and a lot of the great work is at local level with local authorities. And I think that one of the challenges is how do we escalate this and have the connection between the political, the strategies, the vision at central level, and in crisis countries, the central level, the Ministry of Environment tend to be a weaker minister. There's a lot of overcrowding in terms of different issues. So it's where does this agenda fit in the political realm? And then how do we connect the local with the political, and the political track also with the work at the local level? So maybe 3 points.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jan. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, and good morning, everybody. My name is Peter van Sluis. I'm the coordinator of the Civil Society Platform for Peace Building and State Building, based at Coordate in the Netherlands. Great discussion. A few observations. It's great to have this discussion here in the Fragility Forum. That is a start. I think it's very needed to make that link also with climate, peace, and security at the Fragility Forum of the bank. A few interventions, but I'm also maybe departing from what you started with, Diana, about we need to anchor it in a local context. We need to anchor those interventions in a local context, and where possible, solidify and strengthen national ownership. And I'm very much totally in line with you in terms of flexibility, adaptability, agility. But the reality is different, I think. The reality on the ground as it is now is that we see that only 1% of climate finance is governed by local organizations. Recent study has shown that it's not trickling down to the level where this climate finance is indeed anchored and managed and coordinated by local actors. So the more, and the same study also provides evidence that the more fragile a country and the more fragile a setting is, the less funding reaches the destined people who need it most. So we have been, as a group of organizations working on peace building, conflict prevention, and wider climate, peace, and security array, have been coming together to actually catalog on what are potential innovative funding models that could be prioritized for funding local civil society actors and also marginalized communities in fragile and conflict-affected settings. That catalog that we're currently working on has a twofold meaning and a use to both identify and bring together examples of information of funding modalities that can reach those most in need, and also display something about the accessibility of funding, but it also will have a section which brings together learnings and recommendations, and also next and good practices of how this is actually happening and where funding needs to reach better. That catalog, which we're working on with a group of organizations, is tended to be a very practical and accessible tool, which we hope that will also can be shared with donors and also the Peacebuilding Fund, for instance, as a helpful and practical tool to see where these interventions might be connected to where they need to be reached. And I think that is the intention of a catalog that we hope to present latest COP29 in Baku, but we're currently working on it and interested also to discuss this further with the donors here in the room. So thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Peter.
Hello, my name is Bianca Kretschmer. I'm with the Adaptation Fund. So we're also thankful to be part of this discussion. We're one of the climate funds that also signs the Climate and Peace Declaration at COP29. So we appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can actually put it into practice and operationalize it. We signed the declaration because many of the objectives are already very well aligned with what the Adaptation Fund is doing. So also many of the things we just heard and the challenges that were also raised in terms of local ownership and access, long-term capacity building, social inclusion of gender and youth, adaptive management, all these things are really part of the DNA of the Adaptation Fund and of the operational procedures. But of course, we also know that more needs to be done, can be done. And this is why, as part of signing the declaration, the Adaptation Fund is also committed to really scale up support to countries that have multidimensional vulnerabilities, facing compound risks to not only climate impacts, but also other crises and shocks. So what I would like to share, and also, sorry, in the interest of time, I'm trying to be short, but that since the declaration, we have worked on expanding the knowledge and evidence base. So we just this week actually published a new knowledge product on climate adaptation in conflict-affected countries and fragile settings, and it shares concrete case studies from our project portfolio countries and lessons learned from that, both on the challenges and also opportunities. So I would all invite you to go to our website of the Adaptation Fund and read the study. It does show that, of course, there are often challenges in implementation. We have one case in Ethiopia that during the implementation of the adaptation project, the conflict came up. And so, of course, there were project delays, higher costs, insecurity of workers, and so on. But also, we saw a big opportunity, actually, because then the adaptation project was also addressing underlying drivers of water shortage and food insecurity. So it was actually also contributing to sort of a peace positive approach. So we see a lot of potential. And we also see that a lot of the things that basically are important for regular adaptation projects to be successful are even more important in conflict-affected settings, such as strengthening institutions and capacity building, investing in local ownership, investing in partnerships that are not only with the government, but also society and private sector. And adaptive management, with which you also mentioned, and flexibility. So this is why under our new medium-term strategy, we're trying to scale up this kind of support to what we call locally led adaptation. So really this local leadership. We already have a few funding windows where local communities can directly access support for micro grants for adaptation or innovation adaptation. And we're currently working on expanding the support and also developing a new window for locally led adaptation. In the interest of time, I'll keep it here. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Really interesting to hear what the Adaptation Fund is doing in this space as well. If if I can ask, please, to keep your interventions very short, because we now have 8 minutes to go, and I also have some questions online. So,
3 minutes to go is more than enough. I'm gonna use only 1 or 2, don't worry.
Great.
I am Jorge. I am coming from an organization named Agora from Mexico, based in New York. I wanna know, well, I focus on drug policy. That's the agenda that I work. But I wanted to know how to incorporate the DNA agenda, the disarmament and non-proliferation of weapons agenda, into the PDF, so, because it seems, or into other funding mechanisms as well, because the conversation is focused on the necessity to incorporate marginalized communities and to address structural problems or conflicts. However, if we were able to incorporate criminal organizations or informal groups into the discussion, then the markets fueling the conflicts would be reduced. So yeah, I want to know how to incorporate these topics, especially coming from Latin America, which is a region being affected by weapons.
Yeah. It's really interesting point, and one that I think is not discussed enough in this circle. So great, thank you for raising it. Yeah, I have 1, 2, and then 3, and then I think stop here. Maybe give a chance for responses. But yeah.
I'm Christina on World Vision. I'm a particularly third. First, to acknowledge that I think that Thematic review some of these climate security is a really interesting overview of this growing space and your attention to a lot of development needs. One that I was so curious about after that is a little bit of the discussion of, I guess, geographic diversity in this space. There's been quite a lot of attention on West Africa and rightfully so. It was really interesting to hear from our colleagues in Haiti. But are there interesting lessons that you're seeing coming out of Pacific or other parts of the world about how is climate security even taken into different form in these places, the approaches that we want to take look quite different there, or is it just completely unmatched territory?
Great, thank you. Please.
I think mine is a little bit similar. So, my name is Jorge, I'm from the data first. And thank you for organizing this interesting discussion. Another question for you, Diane. You asked an interesting question during your talk, which was what is actually our success criteria and what kind of how to measure that. We actually have answers for that. Then that would be very cool and to get us a little bit closer to what is the specificity of a climate peace and security project as you will go through adaptation.
Just to add on that, there's also a need to focus on action plans.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, just briefly, and I'm sorry, it's Diane again. It's a comment rather than a question. I'm Jen from Alna. Just to really underscore the importance of looking at indicators of impact. I know that can sound really dry, or the evaluation and technical side, but we've been doing mapping for the IFC, the focus group on HDP nexus, and we've been talking to HDP level, but also a lot of local actors. And something coming out is that there's too much focus on measuring processes and activities, and really not the impact during this collaboration, reducing vulnerability, change of the community, and that's actually reducing the momentum to keep going. We're just working on that.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to bring maybe two more quick points from online, bearing in mind that the questions that we're not able to address will all be featured and reflecting the notes that we'll be producing. But there's another question about indicators. What are indicators that we can use to measure the impact of projects? Also, an interesting question, I think, is how do you address the scholars? So those that are not interested in changing the setting. The question around engaging with local civil society, which I think we already discussed a bit. So yeah, maybe I'll give the speakers 1 minute each. Is that fair? Is that good enough? to answer these difficult questions?
Sure, of course. I have no choice anyways. I need to go up in 5 minutes, 2 minutes, I think. So a couple of things. Geographical diversity, yes, the agenda looks different in the different regions. I think that it's interesting to see more demand also coming from other regions to us. The majority of our investments the demands were coming from Africa, but we do see demand coming up from Latin America, Arab region as well. So I think that it's interesting to see it is shaping up differently. Localization, one thing that we've been doing more of, it's mapping where our money is going in terms of implementing partners and sub-implementing partners, so we can get a better sense of who's doing the work at the local level. This is also part of our reporting template now. So now I can tell you in Mali, exactly which local NGO is getting money in this area of work through our funding. And I think that this is, for me, super interesting in terms of mapping out who has the capacity to deliver this, particularly in hard-to-reach area, and how we work more with them, and how we share this information with all of you. So you know that if you want to do more work in Mali, these are the local actors in the Litako-Gourma. We've also piloted a small grant mechanism in the Litako-Gourma region to actually give money directly to those super small organizations, and also looking at how we can work. And this is also part of, I think, should be part of the conversation. How do we give money to the change makers that are not listed and registered as an organization, and particularly in some fragile and conflict-affected states? You know what? The three religious leaders around the corner are the real change makers. It's by having a conversation with them, because they have the gathering and the change agency at community level, that we can get things done. So how we are also giving small funding to those networks that are not registered and who have challenges also to get registration, and talking about the, you know, sometimes the government are not going to accept some of those voices. We have to go. Sorry. I will speak for, but I think a lot of you know me, so come back to me and we can continue those conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. And I'm also really sorry that I won't be able to give our total speakers a chance to reply. Please do send us any further comments. I see Tiffany got crying already. Please do send us any further or thoughts that you have from the session, so that we can include them in the practical note. The conversation is open. We hope that this was just like a first moment. I just wanted maybe to give 30 seconds to Chris O'Dane to guide us through what is next in terms of the actual implementation of the declaration.
Sure, no, just I mean, super quick. I mean, the declaration call that Relief Recovery Piece was sort of an attempt to have sort of political will on statement coupled with like a practical, mechanism of action moving forward. So the declaration itself had a sort of solution package, which we called at the time, that was ranged from very, very specific financial commitments to new initiatives, to changing programming cycles, or sort of other ways that you could sort of sensitize climate action. So we see sort of COP29 definitely not as like an endpoint, but like a measuring point. So I think what we've heard today, like this sort of specificity of approaches in context is so important. Sometimes there are different approaches even within the same country that matter, and I think thinking about this in a macro sense, and also sort of incorporating this a bit as much as we can into the UN DPPA architecture itself is one of the objectives.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And a huge thanks to all of you that joined us in person today, all the amazing participants online. Thanks for your patience. I'm sorry we couldn't address as many of your questions as we would have wanted to. Thanks to my colleagues Alex and Nina behind the scenes, helping us run the session super smoothly, and to the colleagues at the bank also for asking us and providing great support throughout. And creation of a partnership day. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
I was.
I was advising.
Should be kind of-